Well, we should probably get started. Before we go into the agenda, Eric, I see that you joined. Did you want to introduce yourself and say hi, or?
Hello, Eric Van Orman. Just starting contributing to Istio this year, so.
Great. Is there anything in particular you're interested in with regards to policy and telemetry?
Nope, just trying to learn more, figure out, where to best place myself.
Awesome. Well, there's plenty of good spots. So we'd love to have help on the policy and telemetry side for sure. Okay. So I put together a rough agenda, but not in any real order. But I think Kwat wanted to talk, she had to leave early, about some of the stuff. So we'll jump to connection.mtls needs improvement doc. I don't know if people have had a chance to look at this or not, but I'll pull it up.
Right, so this is a proposal to improve situation around connection.mtls that we have right now. It's a bit misguiding because at this point, connection.mtls really talks about the upstream, downstream connections. In Envoy, that means if you look at the attribute from the client-side proxy, looks like it's not enabled because it's a connection from the application to the sidecar. And that is confusing, and I think it leads to probably bad outcomes. So what we want to do is actually define two different attributes at least. The one that describes properties of downstream and upstream, because both of them are useful. The upstream is useful for client-side sidecars that talk to inside mesh, and the downstream is useful for every proxy, including gateways. So that means we need to have at least two different properties. So the proposal is really to just define two properties that will substitute connection.mtls Boolean. And we want at least, for each property, we want at least 3 different categories. So we want to know if it's MTLS, we want to know if it is just regular TLS or is not secure. So I started looking into Envoy recently, but there are some problems with existing APIs inside Envoy code that makes deriving this stuff a bit more difficult. But I don't think there's nothing blocking in theory. The problem really is that when you try to understand upstream connection, during the check call, we don't really have an upstream connection because that happens asynchronously. So we cannot reliably tell what's the status. What we can tell is the desired status. So if the properties of the upstream cluster tell you to establish MTLS, you should be able to derive that property.
So is there a case where that would lie, where it would fall back to something that's less secure?
The only case would probably be if it's more broad, like if it specifies you can use either. So that then you don't know exactly which one.
Okay, so then we should report the least secure one, I think, to be on the safe side, right?
Yes, it should be the least. So we also need probably the ranking of the security properties. So TLS is less secure than MTLS, I would assume.
Yeah.
And there's also another issue of ATLS, which I don't know enough about, but it's something. ATLS is a loss in Google, and it's basically offloading all the stuff off proxy. So we don't even know what it is because it's opaque. So I don't know.
So Istio supports this?
Envoy supports it.
Oh.
So because Envoy supports it, we have to support it, and it needs to be. I haven't quite solved that yet. What exactly it is.
Well, for this kind of stuff, there's a point where just don't make anything up. If you can't tell anything, send that information explicitly so developers can choose. Right?
So maybe we need also a fourth one, which is ATLS, meaning it's just opaque config and we don't know what it is.
Or could that just be generically unknown or undefined or something?
Well, ATLS is better than unknown because it's well defined.
It's still TLS?
It's just basically hardware offloaded TLS, and it just feeds into some hardware, and we don't know what it is.
So the only issue is that it mixes attributes that look like configuration state with actual runtime state, right? The downstream connection is the actual runtime state. So even if you're in permissive mode, you will actually know whether the connection was actually made using TLS or not, or whatever. Whereas whereas the other way around, and we're abstracting everything in one place and kind of mixing configuration with state.
So you're arguing for a second set of attributes that are requested versus
Requested versus observed.
Could be, yeah.
That's not a bad idea.
It's just a lot of, I mean, it also, we should probably not make it overly complicated, because at the end of the day, people are looking if it's secure or not, and it's so. What it
That's true. So I think that if we are certain that observed, so if we are certain that what would have been observed would be equal to configured, then we don't have to make that distinction. Then we can actually say that, no, this is actually the observed state, but we just observe it using some other magic.
So we're certain for upstream, because that's what Envoy will try to do. Right? If you cannot do it, it won't connect. But it's just if upstream says maybe use MTLS, which Envoy doesn't support right now. So if that happens,
right, so permissive on the other side.
Yes,
right.
We should pick the less secure, because we don't know which it is.
Okay.
So we can have a different attribute for check versus report, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So for report, we know what happened.
Correct. For report, we know what happened. Right. So exactly. So then there is actually one requested and one was the observed one. In that case, there is a distinction. Do we just update the value, or?
So for upstream, both of them are the same, because they both happen asynchronously. Actually,
no. I mean, by the time report, things have already happened. So we already know what happened.
There's no way to get the exact connection that Envoy used. So it's probably Envoy problem, but right now you only have no metadata about the upstream pool.
About the upstream pool, okay, not about the individual endpoint.
But yeah, so this, I think it's mostly the challenge there is just making Envoy behave in a way that we can collect stuff. And I'll work on that. But I have a small PR, and Rizan is probably going to help out with that.
Okay.
If he knows what PR is.
Okay, so do we need different attributes, or do we decide we don't need the split?
I think that right now we won't have the split, but make a note in the docs that say that this is obtained. This is reading the configuration state, not the observed state.
Yeah.
Well, or it's the minimum, independent of configuration. The values reported represent the minimum security level. So the connection could be more secure than specified.
Yeah, and so it's little lattice, I guess, where TLS is less secure than TLS.
Right.
But ATLS is a different thing at all.
Or maybe you use a different word than secure, preferred, or something.
I mean, for upstream connection, TLS and MTLS is the same thing, right?
That's like, well, yeah, but
for it, I mean,
you can't even tell really.
Yeah, you can't, because you're not even looking in that direction.
Yes.
So MTLS and TLS is, yeah, it's just TLS at that point.
For outgoing.
Right, for outgoing. For incoming, we know the runtime state, so it's clear for incoming.
I do think it's useful to have the distinction, but I wonder if in the telemetry, right, all people are going to care about is that there's some security.
Well, because doesn't the fact that there's mutual TLS versus regular TLS make some of our other attributes trustworthy? Like identity-related stuff? If you don't have mutual TLS, you can't really trust those things. So if you really care, you might be checking both properties.
Is anything validating the attributes, though? I think that's always one of those.
We don't really use destination properties on the client.
Yeah.
And in making decisions, during reporting, we report the metadata, but we don't use that during check.
No, but when I'm doing server-side check, and I'm deciding deciding my behavior based on who's calling me, if I can trust the identity of who's calling me versus not, I can make different decisions, right?
So that's what connection.mtls right now is for. It's basically only for server-side use, and it's telling if client authenticated. So that solves that issue, and we just need to reserve that.
Correct. So fine. Okay, so
It doesn't work well for
on the
gateways.
outgoing path, it's not as interesting. Yeah.
Also, side note, somebody asked for like more metadata about TLS, like which version of TLS was used. We might need to piggyback that as part of this TLS policies.
Yeah, and they also want other information like cert expirations and stuff like that too. So.
Yeah, there's at some point we need like to basically get all the TLS. Maybe we need like a special source TLS or something like destination TLS.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like we can go ahead with this. There aren't any real objections to moving ahead.
No.
The other thing, I guess, Kwat, before you leave, is the gRPC message counters doc. Did you want to just talk through that briefly?
Yeah, so there is a problem right now that we don't communicate enough about streaming gRPC calls because they look like single long HTTP2 request. So in particular, we don't know how many messages were sent, and that's a problem because some of the istio APIs actually streaming APIs. XDS is a bidirectional streaming, and that doesn't report enough metadata. That was one of the reasons why we use library instead of proxy. And so there is a solution to that because it's very easy to detect messages in gRPC. So this proposal just suggests to add more gRPC metadata to report number of messages in both directions.
So the one thing I'm wondering about this is whether these attributes need to be gRPC specific or if they should be more generic. If you imagine at some point when everything else is done and we start looking at supporting other protocols in a first-class way, you're going to have the same issue. So should we start building a set of generic attributes that can be applied to these other protocols as well?
So instead of request gRPC, you would think like request.streaming message count, or?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Right, so you got this long-running open connection to MySQL, and you're sending commands to it. You'd want to use the same attributes to report this stuff.
Or Kafka messages.
Yeah.
That's reasonable. I mean, I think I will need to understand exactly how using some other protocol, so it would make more sense. But I mean, Kafka seems reasonable. It's just message-based.
No, so the idea is we already reported telemetry about setting up and tearing down these connections. Now we want to go one level deeper and look at what's inside these transports and provide some information about that. So I think message related stuff seems like a pretty generic kind of concept.
Right. Do we want to keep request and response as a top level kind of outer object? Does Kafka use that notion in request response?
Not sure. But yeah, we at least need to have 2 or 3 before we can safely abstract.
Yeah, that's. I don't want to like call request in the context of Kafka because that's confusing. So like, maybe we need to have a top level like stream message. That's why I wanted to understand how other protocol use. What's the terminology they use? Right. That's really.
Okay, I think that's fair because so request is about the overall kind of TCP level connection.
Right. HTTP. Yeah.
And then you look at the thing below as a different category. Yeah, I think that's fair.
I also implemented it in Envoy actually. So there is a already PR and a test, and I measured the performance cost in a very heavy gRPC streaming environment, and it's about 4%. So it's not insignificant, but it's not bad.
And this is reporting at the end of the connection. So we don't know what the overhead would be if we had a timer in there or something. And
So overall cost of the function to process data buffers and at the end of the proxy is about 4%. I would say it's upper bound.
We shouldn't be sending these messages at the end of the connection. Right?
There is a loop that counts messages. I was just measuring how much does that function cost.
But the real implementation should be send the messages every once in a while.
That the timer-based stuff, it can happen in parallel because we also need to report like bytes, and we don't already. So that's probably orthogonal because whether or not you want to report on timer-based is not dependent on messages.
Okay.
But just counting number of messages takes 4% CPU?
In a very heavy gRPC base that only does this particular counting, it's about 4%.
Okay.
So it's not insignificant.
And
That's why I'm a bit.
Also, it's a bit surprising. So we also do this for TCP, right? The
So,
TCP we just do for byte count.
So probably counting the length of the buffer is fine. It's just the peeking into buffer. That's what costs.
Right. So yeah. So it actually has to go through framing of
Yes.
messages. So yeah, it's doing parsing, which it otherwise would not.
Very limited parsing. Like all it does is just read 5 bytes once in a while.
Right.
And that costs 4%. So it's surprising, but I want to ask Envoy people if that's expected.
That's
It's just my bad implementation.
Interesting. I wonder if it's because you're touching cache lines that haven't been touched before.
My gRPC stream is also quite synthetic, so it could be just bad gRPC.
Okay, so if we enable this, if we put this in, this is just applied systematically on all gRPC connections.
Yes, and the cost is primarily for streaming. If it's not streaming, it just reads 5 bytes, 10 bytes per each gRPC call.
So this is another case of something that we need to turn off if nobody's looking.
Well, I can measure it for non-streaming, and if it's like 0, then I don't think we need to turn off. But I guess we will need to gate it, of course. Yes.
If somebody's using streaming but is not looking at these metrics, we should not be collecting them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so we'll have a bunch of those in the Mixer V2, I think.
Yeah.
That's probably the most sophisticated counting we do in Mixer field right now.
For the messages.
I don't think we do anything more complicated than that.
No. Well, yeah, most of the other things are readily available. The only other thing that we count, like I said, is TCP bytes, where on data, we just look at the buffer and see how much size
We
it
no
is.
longer collect that, actually. Envoy does it out of the box. We just copy the data.
Oh, okay. So then,
wondering a bit about this abstraction, whether it's valuable to have high-level counts or if they should be protocol-specific attributes, like if they map well onto each other. I'd be interested to start taking a look at the semantics of all that.
gRPC is interesting because it's technically not necessarily HTTP2 based, but it is in practice. So I mean, abstracting gRPC into its own category makes sense in theory, but in practice, everyone uses HTTP2. So I don't know. Like it's a hard question to answer.
Okay. All right. Unless there's anything else, I guess want to move on. The first item I put on the agenda was the release notes PR. So I want to encourage everyone to take a look at the release notes and see if we're missing things. I think we have some documentation that we need to clean up with things, especially in the policy and telemetry items. This is a P0 for getting release 1.1 out. It's getting the release notes solidified. So encourage everyone to take a look at that.
Yeah, so there's several items in there that have TBD or links to docs. And if we don't have any docs for those things right now, let's just file an issue and then remove the TBD. But if there are docs, let's put a proper pointer.
Yeah, and we should, if there's anything that we don't have there that should be called out, that's the other big thing, right?
Yeah, but if you do have a favorite feature that's mentioned but not documented, write the doc today. Get it in. Otherwise, nobody's going to use your feature.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the roadmap for 1.2, but I know we've had a bunch of people join, so I want to just pause for a second and see if there's anything else people think should be on the agenda or that we should talk about before we do that. Okay, so I put together this sort of draft set of things that I think we should tackle in the 1.2 timeframe, and then beyond that as well, as sort of try and give us a little bit of thought ahead. This is in line with sort of the direction that the working group should present to a larger community what they're working on for the next couple months. So I thought I'd try and organize thoughts here. I've tried to stick to the theme of 1.2 being about focus on stability and improving the user experience of what we have instead of adding new features. So that's mainly how I've tried to organize the work items. I can go through them one by one, I guess, but sort of that's the high level overview. So we've had a lot of reports about and a lot of questions on the discussion forums about add-ons and how to use them and how to integrate with, say, I already have Jaeger installed, how do I get it to integrate with Istio, that kind of thing. So I feel like a lot of what we need to do is focus on documentation around how to use the add-ons, links about how to do productionization of them, then maybe do some support of existing things like operators for those add-ons. There are also a number of issues that people have opened about things they'd like to see in the dashboard, so I added them here as sort of addressing the known issues of the dashboards. Is there any questions about that or things that we don't think are appropriate for 1.2 in the first section? I'll keep going.
Where's the dashboards part?
Up here. So I know you had asked about a separate release workflow.
Yeah.
I think we can improve the performance of the dashboard queries by doing pre-computation through Prometheus.
Yep. Okay.
And that'll help it scale, at
Okay.
large sizes.
Large sizes, yeah.
And then there are some open GitHub issues that people have complained about. It's like switching to points versus lines and all this other stuff.
What's the separate release workflow about?
So one issue that we've had frequently is we either have an enhancement to the dashboard, which otherwise satisfies the rest of the API. It doesn't require any new counters or anything like that. But that has to wait for an Istio release, which is basically unnecessary. So, but a new dashboard is very much useful to people, right? Like someone added something, and now, we want to get it out kind of orthogonal to when the next Istio release goes out.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we don't have a good way of labeling which version of the dashboard goes with which version of Istio. Okay.
Yeah, that's confusing. Is it just a dashboard, or so? What is the dashboard, in fact?
It's the set of Grafana JSON files that you can dump in and see dashboards, right? And Grafana.
Okay, because there's also the binary, right? Which version of the binary is not affected?
Which version of which binary? Sorry.
The Grafana binary.
Kiali.
So I think we're talking about the Grafana dashboard. Kiali also, there's something that needs to be done there probably as well. And I don't know, I saw John on here.
Okay, so this is just
right. So with Grafana, right? It hasn't actually. At least I've never heard anyone specifically saying, "Oh, I wanted the latest version of Grafana binary, and I have to wait too long for that."
Okay, so it's just our configuration state.
But right.
Yes. Now, the Grafana team has asked us to keep up to date.
Yes, correct.
Interesting.
The only thing I think that's sort of hidden in here is this first-class tracing API, and that is sort of a new feature. But as we start to support more and more tracing options like Lightstep, and people are asking now for open tracing-based Envoy integrations. I think like we should have a unified way to talk about tracing. So Mixer isn't doing its own separate tracing flags that have to be configured differently than the rest of the system, that kind of thing.
Okay, so by API here, you mean CRD?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not doing it through a pilot environment variable for sampling, for instance, right? Having some sort of proper support.
Yeah.
Okay. The next section is about just customizing how telemetry, and this could probably also include policy, is done per workload. I think we've had a lot of requests to control at a finer grained resolution than we currently have, whether or not we're generating access logs for debugging, how can I exempt some workloads from tracing, turning policy on and off, that kind of thing. So we've used annotations for some of this, and I think we should expand that support and then clean up how that all works and is documented. So that's sort of my stab at describing what needs to be done there. I know we've talked about the stats generation filtering, how that, like, we don't have sensible defaults there. Maybe we improve that so that they're sensible defaults. We keep people from shooting themselves in the foot, that kind of thing.
Does that include the fix to the enable policy only if there is a rule defined?
Sure, yeah. Gary, I thought you wanted to add something about adaptive sampling.
I mean, I think it might be covered, kind of what you're talking about with the tracing API CRD. It depends what resolution you were thinking about going down to. But I mean, in Jaeger, there's a beginnings of an adaptive sampling mechanism that allows users to configure the sampling rate based on services or individual endpoints. And so that's to enable them to, users to be able to focus on where the errors may be occurring. So, to reduce the amount of unnecessary tracing information that's being captured. So I was thinking if we can build a similar type of mechanism into Istio, and then maybe have, other high-level tooling, possibly Kiali, that would allow users to easily, enable a high level of sampling when they find, a certain type of request is causing problems. It allow, more fine-grained adjustments.
That's a great idea. I like that a lot. Okay. The next section, I think that we can do a lot to sort of improve the way we collect things, including there's some PRs that floated to exempt some metrics from liveliness and readiness checks, but I think we just need to universally apply that. I've heard complaints about the fact that we have error logs out of the box when Istio is installed, and so I think the next two lines are about auditing when and why we generate logs across all Istio components, and try and clean that up a lot. I think that that's something that this working group can take on, and also improve their value, right? Then the next bit is about what extra information we can expose to based on data that we already have. Should we make region zone locality information available for logs, traces, etc.? What else? We talked earlier about what else should we report about MTLS. So that's why I included that information here. And then we started when we were talking about policy on and off. We didn't have a good way of answering questions like, are there policy rules in place in Mixer? And so I want to add some metrics around that, as well as providing examples on, say, if I'm monitoring pilot, how do I know when things are going bad? And should we provide example alerts to show people how they can proactively monitor the Istio components themselves and maybe extend that to the mesh. So that's what that last bullet point is about. Does that make sense?
So two more things. One is the, I think maybe you mentioned that in the liveness, but Mixer restarts when Galley is not available. Is that, did you cover?
I didn't cover that.
Okay. So basically the out of the box experience sometimes, actually often, is that you see Mixer has already gone through a couple of restarts right away, and then the operator needs to go and check, like, okay, why did it restart? Did something bad happen? Like, so we have to do, yeah. So I think we need to do something there.
So just a startup dependency?
So yeah, there is a startup dependency on Galley, and sometimes Galley is not ready.
Yeah.
And then Mixer restarts. I mean, pilot restarts, everything restarts essentially. And then when you look at the cluster, even after an hour, let's say, you see, okay, these have restarted. And then that's like almost a compulsion to go and investigate what happened.
Yeah. So they just need to hang tight for a couple minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of had this catch-all category at the bottom where I think there's a lot of work that we need to do. I think we can improve our documentation and test coverage for the out-of-process adapter with a couple scenarios. I was being asked questions about how it works across clusters, boundaries, and things like that. I don't have great answers there. So it'd be nice if we could put those into facts or update our docs on that. There's some cleanup that we need to do. I mean, we deprecated adapter CRDs, but not really because it took so long to get one out. And I think it's time to finally just turn it off, stop pushing CRDs in. That'll also improve our install experience. We've had a couple issues with the Ingress gateway where people are calling it from inside the mesh and it's forwarding Istio headers, and then that's changing source information and hiding. And so it looks like traffic's coming from two places instead of one place.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, okay.
And I know we've thought about it before.
We've thought about it before. We didn't. Yeah, at least we didn't think that it would be an issue right away. Okay.
Right. But I think in the 1-2 time frame we want to clean that up.
Okay.
And then right below the bottom, I think it fits in with some of the V2 stuff that's going on, where we're going to have these configuration-free implementations of default metrics and telemetry. And so maybe this is the time to start documenting that and providing sort of, here's a simpler way to adopt, sort of partially adopt Istio. And so I don't know if that's something we want to do in the 1-2 time frame, but I threw that out there as something we could consider.
So so for V2, we can't support the existing in-process adapters. We're not quite sure when V2 is going to be ready. When should we start officially deprecating the in-process adapters?
In 1.2 time frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should move everything out of in-process,
Yeah.
or everything except maybe the standard I/O, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, just some debug stuff.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of the multi-process, the multi-release messaging. When V2 is available, we'd like to not have any burden of the legacy adapters need to be removed from the system by the time V2 hits. So we need to have some advance notice to tell people, maybe in 1.1 we say, hey, in 1.2 we're going to delete those.
So it looks like, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but you already have you have had that PR kind of ready for a while, or
my
tool.
version, yes.
Correct.
Yes, but the problem is I have the tool, but I cannot try it for the tool compile with all adapters, but I'm not sure whether all those adapters will work well with those generated tool. I mean the adapter author.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that right after 1.1 is the perfect time to queue that up and say, okay, here we did migration. With the caveat that what you mentioned, and then okay, adapter authors, please. Please go and make sure that your adapters are still. I mean, if the adapters have good test coverage, I think with integration test you should be able to tell if it works or not. If they don't, then we can ask the adapter authors to bring it kind of back up to code.
Okay.
So do we want to make a statement in the 1.1 release notes and maybe somewhere else to say in-process adapters are deprecated, do not write new ones. In 1.2 they will be removed.
Yeah, I think that's Yeah, I think we should definitely do that.
Okay,
Now,
so
now the question is, do you think that because 1.1 release notes are so dense, it would be, I mean, the alternative is we send out a separate email saying that, hey, like this is happening, and okay, now we just moved everything out using a tool.
well, so
Just discuss.
we can put it on the wiki pages to describe in-process adapters.
Okay,
Stop using those. We'll put it in release notes and a deprecation. Maybe we should have a deprecation section dedicated to this kind of stuff, because there's a couple more things that are being deprecated. And there's nothing wrong with having a blog post as well.
okay,
And we can also put it on the forums, right? I think that's something else.
yeah, right.
Another place to be helpful.
Okay.
Is there, or should there be, a framework for developing these adapters? Or maybe an example. Well, I don't want to say example. Maybe a project that could be a base, for creating these things. That takes care of a lot of the details that you end up having to deal with.
So basically, an empty repo kind of thing.
Yeah, something like that. Well, or yeah, close to an example repo, but not example in the sense of it's not really for prime time, but one that's actually, this is a good base to start from.
That's a great idea. So
Do we not have parts of that already?
I have no idea.
So for example, we have a couple of adapters,
Right.
that,
But we don't officially use them as the example.
okay.
So
But I think Scott's looking at more than just an adapter, right? So we could do a full standalone repo that builds
Right.
an adapter.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I have one, obviously, but I'm not sure. I think there should be an official one.
Okay.
We used to have one that we were using as examples for how to compile in-process ones from out of tree.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that repo, but we could kill that and repurpose it, or strip all that ugliness out of there, because a lot of that was Bazel based, I think, even.
Right. Yeah. That time.
I don't think that repo exists.
But did it get killed?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, well, we have the contributor repo. That's right. But this would be, I think, a standalone repo that just builds an adapter. I think that's put the make file in there and everything.
yeah, so a few months back, I had suggested that we create a subcommand to istio-cutl that could generate the scaffolding for the adapter. So I think that is something which we could do in addition to an empty repository.
So what's the benefit of having a tool spit out naked text file rather than just give you the text file?
I mean, I think that's a better workflow. Yeah, that's the only reason. Yeah.
Okay.
But we can build some things around that, maybe like to package. I mean, I had more ideas of like we could create a standard packaging tool along with this, and things like that.
And unless it relies on some maintainable scaffolding outside of that, though, how do you deal with the bugs and updates to it? I would like maybe if there's like I said, if there's a framework or a library or something that could be relied on, that could be maintained, and that would have downstream effects, or could have downstream effects on existing adapters that you could pull from.
I see.
Okay, so that's a little different though.
Well, it is.
It's
a little different, yes. I mean, it could, if you base your project on the scaffold project, then you could choose to pull things from it.
Yeah, we need to invest more in adapters.
Speaking of which, has there been any other thought to secure configuration for adapters?
Secure configuration.
Like like secret stuff, because a lot of the adapters have to connect to external things, right? And I've talked about this before, but an idea of having secrets that isn't tied specifically to the implementation. So if I create an adapter, right now, for me to have secure configuration, I would have to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to use Kubernetes secrets, but then that only works in Kubernetes.
So I started a dialogue with the security working group to have them expose a canonical secrets API, so an abstraction on top of Kubernetes that we could use. I don't think I saw an ETA for that. I'll ping them.
Yeah, I did the same. I started the conversation about it, but and I was going to actually put together a proposal. I haven't had a chance to do that, but I just wanted to raise it here as a ongoing adapter issue as well.
Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing, while I'm talking, I had a proposal, well, an issue raised a long time ago, like a couple years ago now, I guess, to have more request and response timestamps to be able to bracket performance information for incoming and outgoing things like stuff that's useful in a proxy setting for like start and end of receive time, sent time, that kind of thing, so that you could fully measure the performance of every hop.
So those would be new attributes?
Yeah. I can. This was the old issue. It just ended up getting timed out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like we had a fair amount of discussion on that issue. I don't remember. Hold on, let me tell you that. See if I can find it.
There's
I hate
a little bit of discussion.
How do I see the?
I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for the
Oh,
how I show the chat here.
yes.
1701.
Yes.
This one. Okay. So we sort of pointed at the section of code, but didn't really do anything. It seems reasonable.
Unstale this.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually unstale and reopen.
But it's marked as closed.
Yeah, so we have to reopen it.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know that there was such a label. Okay.
Oh yes. If you really like an issue, you can mark it as no stale, and
Okay.
it will not go stale.
Oh, I'm just going to do that systematically.
And then there's a Reaper that kills those.
Well, had I known no Reaper then.
It's one of those little hacks of the whole label system, including you can just assign yourself the LGTM and approve labels and bypass the whole system too. But okay.
Yeah, those are good. Yeah, so for this kind of stuff, it's going to be easier once Mixer is in Envoy, because we're not paying a big tax to send a bazillion attributes. And I think we do need to have the support to turn off functionality if we observe that there's nobody's consuming the particular attributes.
Yeah.
Then that'll give us the freedom to go crazy.
Has any work started anywhere on tuning attribute generation by existing config?
No.
No.
That'll be in Galley for 1.3, I think, basically.
Okay. Okay. Well, just to complete, I mean, we can, maybe I should put that in here, right? Is So then this is just sort of my thought about stuff that's going on beyond the immediate improvements. Obviously, any of the V2 and ecosystem related development, I feel like is going to start to show up post 1.2. There was a request to have different failure modes per adapter. And I think that that's an interesting feature. I just don't think that that's something we can get done in the 1.2 timeframe. Maybe we can.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a simpler feature in some sense, because it's like cross-cutting, but it changes the API. I think that's the that's the issue. It changes the API.
Well, it requires us to introduce the notion of mixer controlled per adapter config state, which we don't have.
Right.
I guess, well, we have the connection state now.
Correct. Yeah, so we have a place to put it in. But okay. But I remember this was asked a year ago urgently, and then I suppose the urgency went away. Because I think security had asked it, right?
Maybe. It came back up again with the Redis quota issues.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Where
correct.
we were failing close, but when errors are happening, that kind of thing is what reminded me of this issue.
Oh, but I think so. I don't think we need this to solve that, right? That's just a semantic difference between quota and checks.
Yes, right. This is sort of my thought. Like once that came in, is that we should support something like this. And it's the same thing with the sampling support, like changing the API. I mean, we sort of have the support hidden in the API, but actually doing implementation of sampling support. That could arguably be done in the 1.2 timeframe, but I just didn't know where to draw the line. And then there have been requests recently for like rate limiting at the ingress and treating the ingress specially. So I don't know what else we want to do there, and sort of ill-defined, but I called that out. And then I was curious about whether integrations add-ons we want to adopt and support. We sort of have very limited WebSocket support now, and so it'd be nice to provide attributes around when connections were upgraded, and maybe start supporting some basic analytics on gathering signals to make recommendations for a mesh at some point. There was a question about mirrored traffic, and I don't think we have any good answers about what the right way to monitor mirrored traffic is. So that's something we should look into post sort of 1.2. And there have been suggestions of providing sort of proxyless istio, providing maybe the Mixer v2 functionality inside of gRPC. And so I don't know what all we need to do there. So I sort of grouped that as a possible thing to work on. And then sort of, I was also thinking we have this experimental command line for consuming, sort of providing a dashboard. What else could we do on the command line policy and telemetry related to sort of make that more interesting? So I don't know if other people have other ideas of things that should be looked at or that we should start planning for, but this would be the spot. So please comment and add to this doc. This sort of just things that came to my head.
It's a long list.
Yeah, right. So yeah, but I think it's useful to sort of start gathering that list so we know what to do next time around for this exact exercise. And that's it. So then the only thing I had on the agenda, and other people please suggest items as they come up, but was, I don't know, Mandar, maybe do you want to provide any update on the WASM v2 work and where that stands and where we're headed?
So the sandbox API is kind of building up to becoming useful, and we are to kind of test it out. We are starting the implementation of a Prometheus adapter using that API, and part of it is that we want to demo something quickly, And the other more important part of it is that we want to exercise the API and kind of iron out any kinks that we see right away. So the idea would be that the idea is that that adapter is going to generate as close to standard istiometrics as possible. And then the out of process adapter will follow after that. That is the way for proxies to directly call the out of process adapters.
Are there any issues that running into or help is needed or?
So I think right now we are okay. I mean, but right after we do the no config, like going from no config to config is going to need a lot more plumbing and a lot more thought. So that's kind of right afterwards. But I think right now we're fine.
Is mid-March still the target, or is that slipped a little bit just as when one is pushed?
Correct. Yeah, mid-March is no longer the target. So now it's at end of March. Yeah, we are mid-March today, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I need to go and update the dates, but yes.
So for the out of adapter phase, all mixer config will be consumed by the WASM plugin, or like all the current mixer config.
Yes. So we, I mean, inherently we were only collecting like the configuration for mixer that we are collecting and we have been collecting it doesn't really have much to do with like specific implementation, right?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah. But yeah, as you said, there will be a lot of plumbing, like
yes,
like
correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So by the time out of process adapter kind of fully start working, yes, we do need the pilot side and like all that plumbing to start.
Okay.
There are some easy ways. So for example, Istio already supports the Envoy filter API.
Yeah.
So we can actually configure Envoy filter API and like push these adapters in with some things that are statically configured upfront and have a working system without all the config being fully dynamically delivered. So there are still multiple paths, and it won't block right away, but eventually we are going to need all of it.
Okay. Well, that's it for the agenda. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up or talk about before we sign off?
Istio-policy is turned off by default. That's in the release notes, and well, it's not yet, I guess, but it will be in the release notes shortly. So I just want to make sure that this group is very well aware of it. So if we hear things like, oh, this is not, this whitelist is not working or something like that, then that would be one of the first things to check, saying, hey, did you turn policy back on?
And hopefully by 1.3, we can just remove that option and it'll just be automatic.
Yeah, correct.
But to be clear, this will still install the policy deployment? What's the latest on that?
Actually, I have a PR to re-enable that, but I don't think it got in.
Okay.
So let me just check that quick. Well, I will update one way or another, and it will be in the. So what the current state will be in the release notes, but I kind of lost track of that PR.
Yeah, we should probably have something on the website for those policy tasks or separate tasks that says, here's how to turn policy on.
What will actually happen if you have the policy CRDs in place and policy is not on? Nothing? You get no warning, nothing, it just nothing happens? Or
no one consumes it and nothing happens.
Okay.
That's why I said the
This is gonna
PD
be
would
fun.
be something is not working. Okay, first thing to check is see if policy is turned, like you need policy and is it turned on.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of sad because again, if you don't pay attention, your cluster keeps working. None of your checks are applied.
Right.
Yeah. And if we don't have the PRN for the deployment, you also like upgrade itself is wonky because you'll be using an old version of Mixer
Okay,
forever.
so I'm glad I was able to know the PR did get in,
Okay.
and the policy deployment is there. Just the checks are turned off, so you'll still see the pods and all that, but the checks would be turned off by default.
Okay, so is there any way we can some place where we can check for the user saying, hey, you currently are using policies in your cluster?
So the operator
Istio Clippy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the operator would do that, but I mean, since we don't have it right now, but the operator would exactly be able to do that, to say, hey, looks like you don't have policy, so it's safe to switch it off when I move over, or you do have policy and yeah, I'm not going to switch it off now. So if we had an operator, it would have done it.
Okay, so but right now, I'd feel better if we could tell the users, run this command line, and it'll make sure everything's okay for you. So that command line will check to see if there's resources. If there are, then it'll turn on the policy check. If there's no resources, leaves it off.
Okay, so you want the operator command to be made available as like an ad hoc thing.
Yeah, just so we can stick it in the.
Okay, so that's a good idea. So I think we could couch it as a release like new release validation tool or something like that, right? That says, I mean, the operator will do that actually, but even if without the operator, someone can run and say, I just upgraded and I want to see if the stuff that I have is still.
Yeah, like it could be an istio-cuddle thing. Istio-cuddle make sure stuff works.
Isn't
istio-cuddle status?
I have to think about this again. Isn't the problem that we can only check for check templates that we know about?
Yes, that's right.
We can check for the existence of any check template.
Can we?
Why not? We know
How do we easily do that? We're going to pull down the proto descriptors and pull out the annotations?
So actually, to do it correctly, we have to do what you're saying. However, we don't have to go all the way, right? What we can very easily detect is whether you are using previous default configuration, which had no check adapters deployed, right? And if we find anything else apart from that, we'll say, hey, it's unsafe, you go figure it out. So I don't, now, in order to do it completely, I agree, we'll have to read the descriptors, but yeah, the simplest tool is just see if there are no check adapters and just see if it's the previous list, and then we're done.
Actually, could this just be an option on Mix-S? It reads all his CRDs.
Okay, and then what would it do?
So you can just run Mix-S specifically, saying check my deployment, and then it'll grovel through the CRDs and tell you whether you have any policy checks going on.
So I think all of that is possible. My concern is whether or not that's going to be done before release.
Probably not.
So
that last week, I suppose.
Yeah, we need something that can be done in the next half day, basically.
Okay, then the cheap and easy stuff.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we're right up against time, so we should probably go.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Yep.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.